This exam develops your knowledge and understanding of businesses and their environment. You'll explore how organisations are structured and the role of accounting and other key business functions in contributing to the efficient, effective and ethical management and development of organisations and its people and systems. The syllabus also focuses on the external influences that affect the business in its environment, including economic, legal, social and technological factors. accaA recommends studying with an approved learning partner and using study materials from our approved content providers. However you study, accaA will support your learning journey with a range of free resources. There's study guidance to help you get started and support throughout your learning journey to get you exam ready. There is guidance from the examining team, including examiners' reports, which provide constructive and detailed feedback. There are technical articles, exam technique guidance, as well as videos and webinars to support your studies. The exam has two sections. The first part has 46 objective test questions worth either 1 mark or 2 marks. The second part has 6 scenario-based multi-task questions, each worth 4 marks. The time permitted to complete the paper is 2 hours. Using the resources available from accaA and your approved learning partner is the proven route to exam success. So good luck with your studies and your exam from everyone at accaA.
So let's go to question 1. The major purpose of the International Accounting Standards Board, which is called the IASB, is to ensure consistency in what? Which 2 words complete this sentence? Is it external auditing? Is that the purpose of the International Accounting Standards Board? Is it financial control? Or is it corporate reporting? Now, to make sure we understand, what the Accounting Standards Board does and why it's a very important organization, we need to look at the theory a little bit. So I thought I would add an extra slide here. So here we go. And here's a slide that gives us some information. So the International Accounting Standards Board is an independent private sector body that develops and approves international financial reporting standards. Okay, so the board develops and approves them. Now, its aims, and here's where we're going to get the answer, is to develop a single set of high quality, understandable, and enforceable global accounting standards. So basically, what do? They want to help organizations understand each other's financial statements. And I want to go to the third bullet here, and then I'll go to the second one. IFRS helped to create and establish a common accounting language. That was the whole idea behind, the development of the IFRSs. We wanted to have some consistency in order to understand the financial reports of organizations, because companies come from different countries and have different accounting principles. Okay, so the second bullet, which I did not read yet, to cooperate as well with national accounting standard setters to achieve convergence in accounting standards around the world. So if you think about this, the major purpose of the International Accounting Standards Board, now that we've read it, basically, is to ensure consistency in corporate reporting, because that's what it wanted to do. The IASB helps draft and establish these accounting standards so people companies, stakeholders can understand the financial reports of different companies. They're not there to provide financial control, of course. There is nothing related to control in anything. And of course, they're not there to do any audit. That is done by an audit firm, okay? Other organizations that come in and check independently the financial reports of companies. Now, if an audit firm, of course, is using IFRS because the company is actually using IFRS itself, then that's a different story. But they're not there. The board is not there to provide any external auditing on their own. So the best answer here is they want to provide some consistency in the way corporations report their accounting. So that's corporate reporting. Let's move to question 2. The leadership style that least acknowledges the contribution that subordinates have to make is A, assertive, B, autocratic, and 3, authoritarian. And I'm quite sure that many of you may be a little bit confused between autocratic and authoritarian because they're kind of close as terms. Now, let's understand, first of all, what these three terms mean, and that's going to help us answer this question. So once again, the leadership style that least acknowledges the contribution that subordinates have to make is assertive, autocratic, or authoritarian. So assertiveness is the quality of being self-assured, to speak your mind, be confident without being aggressive. So here, subordinates, of course, are allowed to speak. It's not one-sided in that sense, okay? So assertiveness is not a good answer here because the question, coming back to this, states that the leadership style, this is in the leadership chapters, that least acknowledges the contribution of others, okay, of subordinates to the leadership. It cannot be assertive because people do speak their mind. There may be confidence there in what they say, but they're not really aggressive. That doesn't mean, of course, that leaders do not agree or give any attention to their subordinates. Authoritarian and autocratic, which are the words I have a feeling that many students kind of confuse a bit, and you're totally right if you do, because they're kind of close, but there's one basic difference here. Authoritarian has to do with authority, right? So basically authoritarian is having respect for authority, requiring to follow procedures, okay? You have an authoritarian company with little involvement from others. It's not no involvement, okay? But there's little involvement. But this is kind of applicable. This could be the answer, but it's not as close as autocratic, which suggests no input. Someone who is autocratic as a leader, doesn't ask for any ideas, doesn't ask for any other viewpoints. The leader is in total charge, has total authority, and that's why this is closer to having the least acknowledgement to the contribution of others. And that's why if you look at the question again, now that we've done the theory and I tried to explain it, the leadership style that least acknowledges, okay, the least then would be autocratic. Assertiveness means that you do speak your mind, okay? And that would not be, of course, least acknowledging. That would be, giving the okay for people to speak their mind and suggest their opinion. So this one would be autocratic. Question number 3, in relation to the management of conflict, which of the following approaches will maximize the prospect of consensus? Now we need to know, of course, what the word consensus is, and consensus means coming into agreement, okay? So that's a very important word here, consensus. We want to reach agreement. So when you have conflict, and of course in every company there's conflict, and that's why in the material for business and technology there is a chapter dealing with how to deal with conflict, okay? In relation to the management of conflict, which of the following approaches will maximize, will help us, of course, reach some sort of consensus? And here we have the options. One is called acceptance, the other one is called assertiveness, the other one is called avoidance, and the other one is called negotiation. So again, as a theoretical question, we need to know what these mean, which helps us better to deal and manage conflicts, okay? So let's go to the theory again. Consensus means reaching agreement, and we did talk about that just a moment ago. So consensus, we want to reach agreement. And one of the best ways is negotiation. When you negotiate, of course, there's two parties involved and they try to reach an agreement. That's why it's called a negotiation, is a strategic discussion that resolves an issue in a way that both parties find acceptable. So that's very important. In a negotiation, each party tries to persuade the other to agree with his or her point of view. So I think that's kind of kind of clear. When you negotiate, there's two parties. They try to reach a decision which is close to our answer. So this one is probably very close. Avoidance means not taking part in a conflict. When you have a conflict, people say, don't make me part of this. I want to avoid this. Sorry, I don't want to know. So there's no consensus there, right? You're not reaching agreement. You're just avoiding it. That's not a good answer here. Let me go back a moment to show you. Assertiveness means speaking your mind in a confident and mild way, but this does not suggest taking the other person's point of view. So when you're assertive, if you remember from question 2 from this exam, we talked a little bit about assertive, being assertive. You do speak your mind in a confident and mild way, but this does not suggest taking the other person's point of view into consideration, while agreement may not be reached. So assertiveness is getting your point across without upsetting others. But sometimes, that may be one-sided. It doesn't mean you will actually reach consensus, which is reaching an agreement. And finally, acceptance means agreeing with one's view in a conflict, but not necessarily a view that would be beneficial. So you can say, okay, I accept. It's in a similar way with avoidance. In one way, you're avoiding the conflict. In other way, you're just saying, okay, I'll accept it, but that doesn't mean you're happy. So when two people want to reach consensus, the best thing to kind of understand is to go with the word negotiation, and that would be the answer for question number 3.
This is question 4. Dara has been appointed to the management team of a professional football club. His role includes coaching, mentoring, and counselling young players who have just signed contracts with the club for the first time. What we're asked to do is to look at a series of activities and work out whether these will be related to his role as a coach, as a mentor, or as a counsellor. In this question, it's obviously important to understand what is meant by a coach, a mentor, and a counsellor. Let's think about coaching first. And with coaching, we need to think about a role where we are improving the performance of an individual. When we're thinking about mentoring, we're thinking about support, guidance, help that will facilitate development. And with counselling, it's around helping someone with problems, to deal with them, or even simply to identify them. So let's have a look at the 4 options here. Let's take the first one, advising players on addressing personal issues such as managing their finances. Well, I think that mainly looks at identifying possible problems and then helping deal with those problems. I don't think it's about improving the specific performance of a footballer, or maybe around their development or their learning and development. So I think counselling works best for the first one. Identifying each player's key skills and encouraging them to develop new skills. Well, I've got to read a little bit into that, I think. And I really think that's around their role as a footballer. And that to me is definitely looking at improving their performance. So I'll say coaching for the second one. Helping the players to anticipate opponents' reactions. Well, again, I think that's improving performance. I've got no problem giving the same answers for 2 of the options that are next to each other. Coaching for both of those. And then helping the young players to settle in during their first week. It would be easy to put down mentoring straight away because we haven't used it yet. But do remember, there is no need for a question to be set where each one of the answers is used. However, with mentoring, providing support, guidance, helping their learning and development, I think helping the young players settle in during that first week is probably most aligned to mentoring? I think that's a challenging question because there's four independent elements that you must get right to score the 2 marks.
So, question number 5. In order to ensure that the policies of an organization are consistent with the public interest, let me just underline that point, okay, on which of the following should the directors of a company focus? So public interest means a number of stakeholders, right? So the directors of a company should focus on the collective well-being of stakeholders. That looks very correct because I just mentioned the word stakeholders, but I'll explain it. Give me a moment. The long-term welfare of the shareholders. Shareholders is actually one stakeholder. It's not everyone, and that doesn't mean public interest. That's only the shareholder. So this is definitely not an answer, not the correct answer, okay? Always remember that shareholder is one stakeholder. When we talk about stakeholders, we talk about a number of different groups or people, such as, for example, the employees of a company, the suppliers of the company, the customers of a company, the financial institutions of the company, unions. So there's a lot of stakeholders, and that's how we kind of can kind of relate the word stakeholders with public interest. It takes everyone into consideration, not just the shareholders. And finally, compliance with legal requirements and codes of governance. So legal requirements and codes of governance could be just regulations for the company. Now let me read it back so we can understand that this is not the answer. In order to ensure that the policies of an organization are consistent with the public interest, which means that everything the company does, the policies are consistent and they take everyone into consideration, the directors should think about, of course, all the stakeholders, which should be the answer here. Now, to the policies that are consistent with the public interest are not the laws that the company should go through or should go by. So for example, a law on data privacy like GDPR is a law that does protect, of course, the people, the customers of the company or anyone relevant with the company, but going through a code of governance, for example, may not be the case, because codes of governance are actually codes that help a company be directed and structured. So in that sense, that is not that is not the answer. And therefore, if you think about it, laws may not necessarily deal with the public interest. So the one that really is more applicable is the one with stakeholders. That would be the answer.
This is question 6, and straight away I can see from the options there, this is about unemployment. There's a small scenario, but to help me get the most out of reading that scenario, I'm actually going to start with the requirement. So which of the following describes the type of unemployment that Martin has been affected by? Structural, cyclical, frictional, or marginal? So as I read the scenario, it would be good if I have in my mind a few ideas about what each of these are. And then I should very quickly be able to make my decision. Well, marginal unemployment is a strange term. I've heard of marginal employment, but not marginal unemployment. So I'm going to discount that one straight away because I'm not exactly sure that it's a real term. The other three I definitely know are terms to describe types of unemployment. Frictional unemployment relates to short-term unemployment. and this is caused by people generally voluntarily changing their jobs. Cyclical unemployment considers the aggregate demand in an economy, and if it's too low, then there will be insufficient demand to generate employment opportunities. It's often due to economic upturns and downturns, and therefore cyclical unemployment tends to be a major problem at the bottom of a recession where demand in the economy is very low. Structural unemployment is where there has been a change in the economy. That could lead to a change in the skills that are being required, or the location where employment or those specific skills are needed. So armed with this knowledge, let's now look at the scenario itself. It tells us Martin is an experienced and fully trained shipbuilder. So this is a skilled person based in a Western European city. So we've got some location information there. Due to a significant economic change in supply and demand for shipbuilding in Martin's own country, the shipyard he worked for has closed and he was made redundant. There's no other local demand for his skills within his own region, and he would have to move to another country to get similar employment. He could only find similar work locally through undertaking at least a year's retraining in an engineering field. So I'm definitely going to remove frictional unemployment as an option. It's got nothing to do with short-term unemployment. I've then got to decide whether this is a structural change or something around the aggregate demand in this economy. Now, it mentions demand conditions, but I think overall, looking at the scenario as a whole, it talks about economic change for shipbuilding. There's now a lack of demand in this region for the skills. He could move somewhere else and his skills would be in demand. I would argue very strongly that it's not cyclical unemployment, and the right answer is indeed structural unemployment. This is question 7. Which of the following is the main function of marketing? We've got 4 options: to identify suitable outlets for goods and services supplied, to persuade potential consumers to convert latent demand into expenditure, so persuading customers to actually spend money, to identify and anticipate customer needs, and to maximize sales volume. Well, all of those seem a reasonable function or aim of marketing. The clue is in the question, and it's in capital letters. Which one of those is the main function? And if I stand back and think, okay, what is marketing there to do? In the simplest terms, marketing is there to identify and anticipate customer needs. So by identifying and anticipating customer needs, it will allow an organization to maximize sales volume. It will allow an organization to persuade consumers to spend. It will allow an organization to identify suitable outlets for goods and services supplied. The correct answer is to identify and anticipate customer needs. And I think the others all become a subset of that main function. auditors would find big data analytics most useful for which two of the following tasks? We've got verifying the existence and ownership of assets and liabilities, predicting the probability of key risks materializing, sampling smaller sets of accounting data, and detecting unusual patterns in key accounting ratios. Well, first of all, let's just think about what we mean by big data. And really, keeping it as simple as possible, we're talking about large quantities of data that are used in analysis. And that analysis could be for a multitude of reasons. To identify trends, patterns, correlations, or other insights. It can help you assess the probability of matters arising or not arising in the future. So looking at the options again, I can immediately rule out the sampling smaller sets of accounting data, because that's clearly wrong, because it's not what big data is. I can also rule out verifying the existence and ownerships of assets and liabilities. Big data, analysing large quantities of data, is not going to help with this verification test, which is more aligned to what an auditor would do. However, predicting the probability of key risks materializing is in line with what I've said about big data. It's analysing data, using large quantities would help the accuracy when you were doing probability modelling. And also, I mentioned that big data can help identify trends and patterns, and an example of that would be in key accounting ratios. So those two statements are correct.
Question number 9. Now, the overall average age of a population in a country is directly dependent on two demographic factors, birth rates and death rates. Sounds logical, okay? So the average age of a population is dependent on two factors, birth rates and death rates. Assuming equal rates of change, so when the birth rates decrease, the death rates decrease. And when the death rates increase, the birth dates increase as well. So assuming equal rates of change, will each of the following lead to an overall aging of the population? What is aging again? Aging means that people are living longer. So the average age of people is, going over 70, 75, or 80 years old. So that means aging. We're getting older, our ages are becoming higher. The average age is becoming higher. So the overall age of a population in the country is directly dependent on two demographic factors, birth rates and death rates. Assuming equal rates of change, will each of the following lead to an overall aging? So what will lead to overall aging, living longer, raising that average age of a country? Would it be decreasing birth rate or increasing death rate? Let's talk about them for a moment. So if you decrease the birth rate, it means lower number of people being born. Thus, the people, of course, that are still living raise their averages because they're still living, and because it's a decreasing birth rate, and the question tells us that it's the equal rate of change. So we're saying that the aging population is also decreasing in deaths, which means that those that are still living will probably raise the age of the country. So when you have a decreasing birth rate, less babies being born, yes, this one here would lead to an aging of the population. Now, if you have increasing death rate, which means people are dying, therefore affecting the people average age negatively, more people dying, right? and more people being born, because we're assuming equal rates of change, that will create an average that will be lower, because those that are being born, if they're increasing at the same rate, will probably lower that average. So the answer here is the decreasing birth rate will, yes, give you an aging population, while the increasing death rate will not. It would lower the average age of a country. Question number 10. Let me read this. Gilles is conducting an appraisal interview with his assistant Jill. He initially feeds back to Jill areas of strengths and weaknesses of performance, but then invites Jill to talk about the job, her aspirations, her expectations, and problems. He adopts a non-judgmental approach, so he's not giving any judgment, and offers suggestions and guidance, okay? So there's a nice story about an appraisal interview. Now, if you look at the theory, this is an example of which approach to performance appraisal. There's a number of ways to approach an appraisal. One way is to tell and sell, which is actually telling someone what to do. Okay, telling someone what to do. So let's see from the story again if this is the case. He initially feeds back to Jill areas of strengths and weaknesses of performance, but then invites Jill to talk about the job, her aspirations, her expectations and problems. So Jill's is not telling and selling in terms of that approach. Telling and selling means telling someone, instructing them what to do, okay? And trying to sell what needs to be done. Jill is not doing that. He's inviting Jill to talk about the job. That's not telling and selling, okay? The 360 approach is when both parties actually appraise each other, or everyone appraises the other. That's the 360 approach. So in this case, there is no situation where Jill is actually appraising Jill's and Jill's appraising Jill. There's actually only one side is talking about the appraisal interview, and then Jill is invited to talk about her job. So this is not the 360-degree approach when everyone appraises the others. The tell and listen is more close if you read this, even if you did not know the theory. You know, Jill, she's being invited to talk about her job, her aspirations. So you're telling someone, talk to me about the job, and I will listen. There is no guidance. There is no, there's no judgmental approach. And of course, just some guidance maybe at the end, but not telling someone what to do. So telling and listen is close to the answer here, unless the fourth option is probably better. But let's see. The problem-solving approach is what? Solving a problem. Is there any problem noted in this? No, there is no problem in this story. Jill is conducting an appraisal interview. He initially feeds back to Jill the strengths and weaknesses, and then tells Jill, okay, can you please talk to me about your aspirations, your expectations, and any problems you have? But they're not solving anything. He adopts a non-judgmental approach and just offers suggestions and guidance. So the closest one, the best answer here is the tell and listen. Of course, Jill is telling Jill something about her strengths and weaknesses, but then he is listening. So that would be, even if you did not know the theory, this one would be a little bit more closer, I think, to the answer. Yes, you should have known what 360-degree approach is and know a little bit about the tell and sell, but overall, this one's a little bit more, I think, self-explanatory. So the answer is tell and listen.
What is the primary responsibility of the external auditor? Well, as soon as I see this question, I start to think about the key elements of an external auditor's responsibilities? The responsibility is to provide an independent opinion. They provide an opinion on the truth and fairness of the financial statements of an organisation. And they have a responsibility to report to shareholders. So with that in mind, let's look at the options. The first one, to report all financial irregularities to the shareholders of the client. Well, that is not the primary responsibility of the external auditor, and actually it's not the responsibility because of that word all. If an auditor finds a $1 irregularity, they're not going to report that to the shareholders. So that option is not correct. The second one I can rule out in a very similar way. To verify all the financial transactions and support and documentation of the client. Well, that's just impractical and impossible, realistically, for any large client. An auditor will verify transactions to ensure that the financial statements are true and fair, but they won't verify everything. The third one, to ensure that the client's financial statements are reasonably accurate and free from bias. Well, that's pretty close to the points that I've made. Free from bias, a little bit of independence. Accurate and free from bias, well, I think that's reasonably equivalent to true and fair. We're not saying that they are absolutely accurate, but they are reasonably accurate. So far, that's the best option, but let's just look at the fourth one. To ensure that all the client's financial statements are prepared and submitted to the relevant authorities on time. Well, first of all, I don't like that word all, but secondly, it's not the auditor's primary responsibility to do this. It would be the management who are responsible to ensure financial statements are prepared and submitted. So although the third statement is not exactly the same as how I described the primary responsibility of the external auditor, it is undoubtedly the closest and the best option.
So let's move into question number 12. Let's read it. The following are examples of business information. 1. Annual forecasts of revenues and costs. That's forecasts of revenues and costs for a department. Product development plans for the next 2 to 3 years. And 3, targets agreed by key managers at their performance appraisal reviews, or targets. So what do we know about tactical and strategic information? That's very important here. So which of the above would be classified as tactical information? So the question here is, what is tactical? And if you remember from your studying, tactical compared to strategic is more short-term. Its strategy has to do with long-term. So which of the ones have to do with long-term? Only number 2 here. So product development plans for the next 2 to 3 years, that's more strategic. The other 2 are more tactical. The annual forecast, that's annually, that's every year. That's not long-term. That's not 2 or 3 years down the line. And targets agreed by key managers, that's more specific. So I would say 1 and 3. And the answer is, of course, 1 and 3. Question number 13. Wasim is the customer services manager in a large leisure park. So he's a customer services manager. The forthcoming weekend is going to be the busiest of the year, as it is a public holiday.
Wasim has to cope with several absentees, so people will be away, leaving him short-staffed in public areas of the park. His manager has told him that he expects him to catch up with some administrative reports that were due last week, and Wasim also has to arrange for 6 new staff to be trained. So he has a lot of things to do, who will be arriving imminently. So Wasim has a lot up his sleeve, and he has to make sure that he copes, in the best way. This is a time management question. Let's see the question itself. In order to manage his workload most effectively, what should Wasim do? Now let's read them. Deal with the reports that the manager insists be prepared. That's one thing. So he's coping with one thing among the tasks that he has to do. Carry out some of the work that the absentees would normally do. That's again another different thing, but it's one thing among the things that he has to do. The third point is train the new recruits. Again, that's training the 6 new staff. That's again one thing among everything he needs to do. And finally, prioritize the tasks in relation to the most important business outcomes. And I think it's a bit obvious that it's much more important for Wasim to think and prioritize what would be the most important thing for him to do, and that would be something that could manage his workload most effectively, which is actually the question. If he does any of the first 3, he will be dealing with one of them, but which one is the most important? So he will have to, first of all, manage his workload by prioritizing, which is something that you need to know in this exam. Question number 14. In order to discharge their duties ethically, finance directors must ensure that the information published by their organizations provide a complete and precise view of the position of the business without concealing negative aspects that may distort the reader's perception of its position. Okay? And that is basically the role of a finance director. This duty describes which of the following ethical principles. Now, they're all ethical principles here, all of them, and it's important to see which one applies mostly. So, of course, and a finance director needs to be honest, needs to be objective, needs to have probity, and also be independent. But here, the question is, the finance director must ensure that information published by the organizations provide a complete and precise view. That means that someone is competent, not just honest. Someone did work. So honesty and probity would probably go out, because that's not the only thing. To complete the work and to make sure your view is correct takes competence, takes skill, takes quality of information, right? Without concealing negative aspects means that you're unbiased, which means you're independent, but you're also objective. So the answer should be between objectivity and independence. But as we know, or you should know, independence is mostly a mindset, making sure you're not being biased by anything. You have the opportunity to act, of course, without any bias. And objective is when you have also the capability, the competence to do correct work, to produce quality information, but also be independent. So that covers the answer better. So the word is objectivity. Question number 15. Which of the following is a purpose of the International Federation of Accountants? So what is the purpose? Why are they out there? What is their purpose? And this is a theoretical question, so it's good to know what the IFA does. Option number 1, promotion of ethical standards. Yes, that's what they do to all their member organizations. So that's a good answer. This could be the answer to the question. Let's go to the rest to see if there's anything better than that. Number two, development of universally applicable detailed rules to deter inappropriate behaviors. They don't make any rules that would be universally applicable, and that's, of course, that is not one of their purposes, so this is not correct. Prevention of international financial crimes. They're not there to prevent financial crimes, such as money laundering and insider dealing. They're there to promote an ethical mindset. So they're not there to prevent any crime. And finally, agreement of legally binding financial reporting standards across all members. No, they're not there to create any agreement of legally binding financial reporting standards. That's not what they do. They actually are there to promote ethical standards, and that is the answer to this question here. Question number 16. Are each of the following consistent with a government's policy objective to expand the level of economic activity? So, what do governments do to expand the level of economic activity? So the first option, an increase in public expenditure, which means you're spending more money as a government for the public, for its people. And that sounds logical. If you spend more money in housing and pension, in whatever, for your public, that means that your public, it gets better off. They probably make more money. They can do more things with the money that the government is spending on their behalf. So that will help expand the level of economic activity. Now, if you increase taxes, that does not help, because you actually have to pay taxes based on the profits and what people are making, either as a business or as an individual, and that means you're left with less money to spend, and that does not expand the level of economic activity. So higher taxes don't, but public expenditure, of course, does.
Neil works as the procurement manager of JL Company, a large services company. Information provided by Neil is most relevant to which of the following elements of the market and mix? Well, let's start by just reminding ourselves of the market and mix. And initially, we've got the 4 Ps. And they are price, promotion, place, and product. But if you remember, we've got an additional 3 Ps, which are more related to services type companies. They are processes, people, and physical evidence. So looking back at the question, we've got Neil, who works as a procurement manager. It's a large services company, and we need to work out which information provided by Neil is most relevant to which of the following elements of the market and mix. Now, these are all elements of the market and mix: price, place, processes, and physical evidence. So we can't rule anything out straight away. It does mention it's a services company, so maybe that leads us down to the additional 3. However, we've got to focus on Neil's role. He is a procurement manager. That means he will be involved in the purchasing of products that JL Company will use. Because Neil is involved in the purchasing of products or even other services that will be used by JL, the best or most relevant element of the market and mix will be the price. The price of the services that JL will offer will be influenced by Neil's role as procurement manager. The best answer and the correct answer is price.
Question number 18, in relation to employee selection, which type of testing is most appropriate for assessing the depth of knowledge of a candidate and the candidate's ability to apply that knowledge? So you have employee selection, which is a key area of the syllabus of business and technology, and which type of testing is most appropriate for assessing the depth of knowledge of a candidate and the candidate's ability to apply the knowledge. Now, knowledge of a candidate and ability to apply has to do with competence. So you need to have the word competence in your mind, and this is probably the best answer, but let's explain why the others are not. Intelligence testing has to do with comparison between two people. So you're not comparing here. You're doing a test to find out if someone has the knowledge, if they have the knowledge and also ability to apply that knowledge, to use that knowledge. Intelligence is, part of that, but you usually are comparing between two people. There's no comparison here in this question. And psychometric testing has to do with personality. Personality is not knowledge, so it mostly has to do with values, personality, opinions. But here, competencies or competence testing is what we need, because when you try to select employees and you're focusing on knowledge elements and their ability to apply that knowledge, that's a competency. It's a skill you have, and that's the best answer among the three.
Malachi has been asked by his manager to analyse the financial accounts of ABC Company, which is bidding for a contract offered by Malachi's company in the near future. The two financial statements which he'll be using as his sources are the statements of financial position and the statement of profit or loss. Here's the requirement: from which financial statements will Malachi obtain the following information? So this really is testing our knowledge of what goes into a statement of financial position and statement of profit or loss. The statement of financial position is that snapshot of the organization's assets, liabilities, and equity at a point in time, whereas the statement of profit and loss is a history book, which will give me a record of the sales, the purchases, and other expenses over a period of time. So let's look at each of these four in turn. Liquidity. Well, liquidity looks at an organization's level of current assets compared to its current liabilities. Undoubtedly, that statement of financial position which has those assets and liabilities listed. Operating costs as a percentage of turnover or sales costs or purchases, definitely in the statement of profit or loss. Long-term borrowings, well, borrowings are another term for liabilities, therefore definitely statement of financial position. And equity, we've already established, is something which goes in the statement of financial position.
Question number 20. Lynn owns a busy restaurant. She has had complaints from regular customers about diners failing to control their noisy and unruly children, which is spoiling their dining experiences. So some regular customers have complaints in Lynn's restaurant. Which of the following courses of action would be regarded as a pluralist solution? Now, the word plural means many. And we're talking about stakeholders here. So you have the regular customers, the families and their children. And if you want a solution that's pluralist or is plural, it means it covers the requirements and it makes every stakeholder happy. So you want everyone to be happy here. So in along these lines, and having given you the theory, which one is the best option? Not accepting bookings from families with children. That doesn't make sense. If you want to be plural, or you want to have a pluralist solution, we said that you want everyone to be happy. And here you're only making, of course, the regular customers happy because you're not accepting families and children. Setting aside a separate section of the restaurant for families and children. That's not bad. That looks good. Let's see what the other options are. Advising customers that the restaurant is a family restaurant before they book. That's not good, because by saying that, some people that don't want to be alongside with kids and families and noisy, let's say, situations will not go to the restaurant. So that's only covering one segment, one type of stakeholder. And finally, take no action assuming that those who complain will always be a minority. That's not good, because that's not pluralist. That's not being a pluralist. You are actually only thinking about your family people, because the regular customers are, let's say, a minority. So the best one is setting aside a separate section of the restaurant for families and children, so you can separate them. That makes everyone happy, and that is being plural. Question number 21. Which of the following is data protection legislation primarily designed to protect? So why do we have data protection legislation? And I'm sure you've heard of, let's say, examples like GDPR, which is the very well-known globally now, I would say, directive or legislation for data privacy. Okay? So which of the following is data protection legislation primarily designed to protect? A, all private individuals on whom any data is held. If it's a legislation, there's nothing here that implies any legal issue or regulation issue. So that's not the answer. It's not for everyone at every point in time. It's there as a legislation to cover, of course, companies and where regulated data is held. So the second one, it looks better. All private individuals on whom only regulated data is held. That's important. That's why it's called the legislation. So companies need to be, of course, relevant to this regulation. It's a legislation, so it's got to have the word regulated in it. And finally, all private individuals and corporate entities on whom only regulated data is held. That would be good if it didn't have, of course, this word here, corporate entities, because data protection has to do with the individual. Question number 22. Which of the following is an example of the system used by a company to record sales and purchases? Now, right off the bat, you can see that the word sales and purchases are actually transactions. So if you just know what these things are, logically, option A would probably come to mind, because you need to have a system that records these transactions. So the answer would be, that's an example of a transaction processing system, or a TPS, as people like to call it. Now, an MIS is actually where you get the information and you try to get some insights from it, organizing this data and summarizing sales. That would be called an MIS system, not a transaction. You already have the transactions and you're trying to make sense of it and organize it and group them together. That's an MIS. So I'm giving you a little bit of theory so you know how to understand these systems. An office automation system could be word processing, spreadsheets, or whatever. So that's not the answer. That doesn't record sales and purchases. You're using the system, of course, for different reasons, but that's not as good as a transaction processing system. Okay. And finally, a decision support system is a system at a more higher level, where you're taking all the information you have from transactions, from insights, from grouping information, and trying to make decisions in terms of the data and the transactions you have. So just recording sales and purchases would be a transaction processing system. Question number 23, which two of the following are examples of connected stakeholders? Now, connected stakeholders is a term that relates to those groups or people that have a contract with the organization. They're not internal. They don't work on a daily basis for the company, but they have an association that is actually bound by a contract or some transaction in that sense. So stakeholders can be defined as anyone who has an interest or can influence the organization. All of these, of course, can do that, but who are the ones that are connected? And we need two. Remember, read the question well. It's not one. So we have two options here. So the executive directors and the managers are actually working for the company closely with it. They're called internal. They're not connected in the way the definition of connected implies. So suppliers and customers do have some sort of contract with the company. When you buy services, you sign something. For example, you want to do an audit, or if you're a supplier, you have a contract to supply the company with something. So these two, supplier and customer, of course, is the answer. Question number 24. In an economic environment of high price inflation, those who owe money will gain and those who are owed money will lose. So what happens when there's inflation? That's the main question here. When there's price inflation, it means that the money you actually have in your pocket is not worth the same. So if you owe money, basically, you actually will gain because the money that you borrowed in the previous, let's say, time is not worth the same. It's worth less. So basically the answer is yes. Those who owe money will gain because they still have to pay the same amount, but the money's value is not the same. It's valued less because you have inflation. And those who are owed the money, the people who are expecting to get payment, they, of course, will get their money back, hopefully, but their money will not be worth as much as when they actually gave it to someone else to borrow. So the statement is true from that perspective. Remember that. Question number 25. Role-playing exercises using video recording and playback would be most effective for which type of training? So when you do training and you use role-playing, you actually want to show communication skill. You want to show persuasion skill. You want to see how people react when are told something. So let's see which role-playing could be, when role-playing would be most effective in these options here. So when you disseminate technical knowledge, okay, dissemination of technical knowledge. This is not role-playing, first of all. When you disseminate technical knowledge, you're giving it, you're sharing it. So that has nothing to do with role-playing. You're just giving some information about something technical. For example, you may say something about a machine and how to operate it, but you're sharing the information. You don't need to talk to someone in terms of communicate and see how someone behaves under a circumstance. Second option, introduction of new processes or procedures. If there's a new process, you have to read it. You have to know the procedure. I don't think role playing will be very effective here. Or it could be, but maybe not most effective. Maybe there's a better option here. So when you have a new process and you send someone a procedure, you don't need to have a role play necessarily, unless it's something very complicated, but let's see what the other options are. Regulation and compliance. These are laws. Regulation and compliance means a law. You either follow it or you don't. So you don't need to have any role play here. But let's see the other option. Development of selling skills. Selling skills, that's very important. When you sell, you actually have a communication. You're communicating with someone. You want to persuade someone. You want to see how you can, do a good job in terms of sales to convince someone to buy your product. So this would be very effective if you used it in training, if you use role playing, okay? If you try to use role playing and an exercise for that, I think it would really help to say, okay, now you sell to me. Sell me something. Let's see how that works. Let's take the role. I'm the customer and you are the person who is trying to sell. So obviously the fourth option is better in the sense that it's most effective. Okay, so role-playing exercises using video recording, you can play back and see how someone behaved, how someone reacted, what someone said would be most effective for development of selling skills. Question 26. Renata has attended a leadership development course in which she experienced a self-analysis exercise using the Blake and Mouton managerial grid. Now, this is a theory. It's a grid. I will show it to you. The course leader informed her that the results suggested that Renata demonstrated a 9.1 leadership style. Now, to understand what a 9.1 leadership style is, and if you haven't studied it, you can see the grid and you'll get it. So give me a moment. Which two conclusions, again, make sure you read this very well. We're waiting for two conclusions, not one, may be drawn in relation to Renata's leadership style. So the first conclusion, she maximizes the involvement of her team. So I have to show you the graph and we will come back to this in a moment. So that's one conclusion. She demonstrates little concern for other people in the team. Third, she balances the needs of the team with the need to complete the task. And finally, she is highly focused on achieving the objectives of the team. Now, to make this clear, to see how team-oriented or how not as much team-oriented Renata is, let me go further. So here we go. This is the actual grid by Blake and Mouton, and this is what we need to know. So let me draw here, and what Renata is closer to is 9.1. Here it is. So if you know the grid, you know where to look. And this means basically that Renata does not have a lot of good concern for people, but she does have a concern for production, which means that she is more authority and compliance oriented. So give me a moment to erase this and let me go back to the options we have. So coming back from the grid, as you understand, 9.1 means she is concerned more with production and what the company's doing, but not about her people. So the two conclusions that may be drawn is that she demonstrates little concern for other people in the team. And of course, she is highly focused on achieving the objectives of the team, but not her team. And that's why it's 2 and 4. Question 27, the implementation of a budgetary control system in a large organization would be the responsibility of the internal auditor. So you have to know what internal auditor does. Does the internal auditor deal with the budgetary control system? Does the internal auditor implement it? The answer is no, because the internal auditor is there to safeguard the assets and check things in the company, check the controls. They don't implement the budgetary control system. So this, of course, answer is false, and it's very important for you to study the role of the internal auditor. Question 28. Which two of the following are roles of an external auditor? By the way, we're not looking at internal auditor here. We're looking at external auditors. Okay? And we're looking for two options that are good. First of all, confirming that the financial accounts present a true and fair value. Of course, that's a role of an external auditor. When you audit a company and their financial accounts, basically, you need to make sure they do present a true and fair value. So this one is a very good option. Second option, confirming that accounts have been prepared in accordance with legal requirements. That is also a role of an external auditor, because external auditors make sure that the financial accounts have been prepared in accordance with all legal issues that, of course, govern that company or that industry, and that's the way it should be. And finally, so we already have two, but let's see if we are correct. Let's see that maybe something that makes us go back and reassess things, confirming that there are appropriate policies for preventing and detecting fraud. So that is not the job of an external auditor to check if the policies the company is using are good enough to prevent and detect fraud. That would be a consulting project, not an external auditor's role. So that would be something that the company should deal with, not the external auditor. Question number 29. Professional accountants must demonstrate integrity at all times. Now, the word integrity is very important, especially in corporate governance for all of us. And integrity means that you're doing the right thing always, even when no one is looking. That's my definition of it. So it actually has a lot of morals. It has a lot of let's say transparency, accountability. It has all these key concepts, I would say, of corporate governance all in one. So which of the following best describes the meaning of integrity? And I gave you my definition, but let's see which one is more close to what I just said. Providing timely and accurate information. That is not integrity. That is more professional competence. You're actually good in providing things on time, and you're accurate in what you do, which means you know your job very well, but that doesn't have anything ethical to it. There's no values to it. Number two, applying consistently high moral values. That's obviously a very good answer, and that has to do with the values and the high morals, and that is close to what integrity is all about. And finally, maintaining a neutral and unbiased view of all business decisions. That is basically being, let's say, independent, I would say. So that's not integrity, that's more of independence. So this one and this one are not good enough. High moral values is the one we need.
Which two of the following are characteristics of a public limited company but not a cooperative? Well, first of all, let's just think about a public limited company. That will be an organisation that is owned by shareholders, and it will have wealth maximisation as a primary objective. A cooperative, however, is more of a mutual organisation which is owned and run by its members for its members, so it doesn't have shareholders. Let's look at these options. first one, all members are invited to attend the annual general meeting and participate in decisions at the meeting. Well, is that a characteristic of a public limited company? Well, members or shareholders are invited to attend the annual general meeting. And yes, they can vote on some matters, but I'm not convinced that they will be participating in decisions at the meeting. That reminds me more of how meetings would be run in a cooperative, so I don't think that that's the right answer. Maximising the excessive income over expenditure is not a primary objective. Well, I don't like when we've got these nots in answers. It does make my head hurt a little bit. But I know that wealth maximisation, or maximising the excessive income over expenditure, is a primary objective of a PLC, public limited company. So that can't be right either. So the correct answer must be the third and fourth answers shown here. However, let's just have a read through them. Members can vote according to the number of shares owned. Yes, shares, shareholders, that relates to a company. And shareholders do vote according to the number of shares that they own. And, especially being a public limited company, shares can be bought and sold through personal transaction of the members. Remember, members is another term for shareholders in a company. So those options are correct.
Question 31. A company has advertised for staff who must be at least 1.88 meters tall and have been in continuous full-time employment for at least 5 years. So a company is putting this advert to recruit people for their organization. Which of the following is the legal term for this practice? The legal term. It's important to understand that we're looking for a legal term. Is it implied discrimination, victimization, direct discrimination, and indirect discrimination? Now, to understand this a little bit better, let me give you some quick definitions of these. So discrimination, for example, is when actions based on conscious, let's say, or unconscious prejudice that favor one group, that's when we have discrimination. Now, if it's direct discrimination, it occurs when an employer treats an employee less favorably than another, possibly because of race, because of gender, because of age, or whatever. So that's direct discrimination, just to make sure we know what everything is. Indirect discrimination is when a working condition or rule disadvantages one group of people more than others. So I think this is kind of closer to what we have here. This is a work condition, right? You got to be at least 1.88 and in continuous full time for the last 5 years. That's more indirect discrimination. You're not directly saying something, but it's basically discriminating, but in an indirect way because of the working condition or some sort of rule which may disadvantage people that are, let's say, 1.75 instead of 1.88. Now, victimization is a stronger word here, and victimization is when someone has already complained about something and the employer has treated someone less favorably. So someone can go to the owner and said, "Why aren't you hiring me?" And then, of course, complaining, and then someone, of course, from the organization doing something that would create that person or turning that person into a victim. That's victimization. There's nothing like that here. There's an advert for staff, so there's not something that made someone a victim, at least not yet. And finally, implied discrimination is actually when it's suggested, when you're kind of discriminating, but you're suggesting it. You're not really clear as well. That is kind of similar to indirect, but the legal term is this one here, indirect discrimination. Question number 32. Which of the following statements about blockchain is not correct? So to answer this one, we need to remember what blockchain is and what is it all about. Now, blockchain is a shared ledger let's say that facilitates the process of recording transactions and tracking assets in a business network. That's a good definition. And overall, it's there to help with trust. And that's why it's quite popular with people around the world, and it's gaining momentum. Now, it is used by cryptocurrencies, and I'm sure you know some of that detail. However, let's see which statement about blockchain is not correct. So first of all, blockchain information requires a greater need for auditing of transactions. Now, if blockchain is that good to help with trust, less auditing will be needed. So this one is not correct. So the first one already is probably the answer, but let's see the rest as well. Blockchain transactions have an indelible record, which means indelible is a difficult word, but it means that whatever is there stays there, like what the internet is all about. So if you actually make a transaction, it has to stay there. Third point, blockchains can be posted to a public ledger. Yes, that's also correct. So these here are correct about blockchain, so they're not correct in our answer, because we're being asked, remember, which of the following statements about blockchain is not correct. So up to now, the first one is not correct, when the second and third ones about being indelible, which means that it does stay there. Yes, that the blockchain does that, and blockchains can be posted, yes, to a public ledger. That is true, and we just said that in the definition. And finally, blockchains allow for increased transparency in the recording of business transactions. That is also true, and so therefore it's not the answer. Then the reason for that is that everyone involved in the blockchain or being part of the blockchain can verify the transactions. So that calls for more transparency. So these three are correct about blockchain, while the first one, having a greater need to offer for auditing, of course, is not the case. Given that you have more transparency, public, and more trust, you need possibly less auditing. Question number 33. In a higher education teaching organization, an academic faculty is organized into courses and departments, where teaching staff report both to the course program managers and to subject specialists, depending on which course they teach and upon their particular subject specialism. So we see that people take on different tasks, and many people seem to have more power. So according to Charles Handy's 4 cultural stereotypes, which are task, role, person, and power, as we can see here in our list, which of the following describes the above type of organizational structure? So task, role, person, and power. Now let's take them one by one. Now, task is when, of course, groups are formed to solve particular problems. Lines of communication are similar to a matrix, which is kind of close to the answer because that's how a university works. There's many people who are empowered to do things, so they are empowered to take decisions. And the fact that you have both the course program managers and the subject specialists that these teachers report to, it shows that it's more complex. So it looks like task up to now, but let's see the rest. Role. What is a role culture? A role culture is a bit more bureaucratic. Staff operate within the rules. The structure of the organization is kind of well defined, and each individual has clear delegated authority. So this is not the one because it's not clear. The staff report to both program managers and specialists. So this is not, there's not one person or there's not one role that they play. They do more things because they have to fulfill a task, which is closer. So it's not role. The person culture is not the one, because the person culture, it's also called human culture. There is actually, the emphasis is on the person, and the whole culture is around the person and not the task or the role or the purpose of the job. So that's not the case here. These teaching staff people have specific tasks to accomplish. And finally, power is not the answer, because in power cultures, the power culture is associated with autocratic leadership. They're concentrated, the power is actually exercised by a few people, and this is not the case here, where you have a lot of tasks that need to be done and more of a matrix type of culture. So the answer is task. Question number 34. Which pattern of communication is the quickest way to send a message? Now, this is from the chapter of communication. So let me just explain all these 4 ways to communicate by a professor called Levitt. Let me just draw this for a moment. So let's make a wheel here, and let me go back to my other ways to make this. Let's make a Y to show you what we mean. And here's a Y. And the circle, which is actually the similar style. I haven't made the wheel yet, but let me just decide to put that here as well. That's a normal circle. And then the chain would probably, again, just be something like this. So let me just do some more analysis on this to help you with your understanding. So here we go. So the wheel, you have the leader, let's say, in the middle, and you have people here, 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 in different, let's say, in different areas. So you have to, so you can communicate directly. So the leader communicates with this person directly, with this person directly, with this person directly, with this person directly. So it becomes like something like a wheel. And that is more direct communication, even though the people outside in the circle, in the periphery, don't communicate with each other. They get their information from the leader directly. Okay, that's clear. It seems fast, and this could be the answer. Let's see the why. The why, the leader is in the middle right here, and there are people, of course, on every part of the chain. So you have people here, but you've broken down communication in 3 parts, if you notice. If the leader is in the middle right here, then, you can communicate with these 2 people, but of course, to get from this person to that person, the message, may take more time. So that is not very clear. It's not as direct as the wheel, where the leader talks directly with every person in the communication circle. So the why breaks the people into 3 different areas, and that may take more time. The third, the wheel, is that, the wheel leader could be like right here, but even if you communicate this way or the other way around, in terms of the people you have, sitting in this, let's say, circle, by going around, they don't communicate directly with the leader. So every person is actually, communicating with the other people. That means there's no direct communication with the leader, which takes more time to get through this. And finally, the chain is similar to the situation with the circle, and the person, let's say the leader in the beginning, who wants to send a message to communicate, has to communicate with the next person, and then the next person, and the next person, and at the end, of course, there's no loop like the circle, so the last person may get a distorted message. So which pattern of communication is the quickest way? The quickest seems to be the wheel, for the reasons I just mentioned. Question number 35. Kelly is discussing a business problem with Powell on the telephone. Who will be involved in encoding the communication that takes place? That's the word that we need to ensure we know. Encoding the communication that takes place. Is it both Kelly and Powell? Is it Powell, or is it just Kelly? So encoding, just to make sure we know the theory, is the process of turning thoughts into communication. So since they are discussing discussing, which is another important word here, since they are discussing, they are both encoding. The encoder uses a medium to send the message, so they're discussing, they're talking. That's the medium. So it could be a face-to-face meeting, but both of them, since they are discussing, they're not, if it was only Powell listening, then it would have been different, but now they're both discussing. So who will be involved in encoding? Both of them are, and the answer is Powell and Kelly. Question number 36. Which of the following types of new legislation would provide greater employment opportunities? So we want to have more employment opportunities in large companies. First of all, new laws on higher compensation from employer breaches of employment contracts. This would provide more costs, I would say, for a company. So a new law that requires an employer to pay more if they breach a contract would make them cautious, of course, to keep the people they have and to ensure that they have no problem. That's not going to open their recruitment process, or they're not going to give opportunities to other people. They would be cautious. It would be risky. Number two, new laws on health and safety. Okay, a new law on health and safety will require more training, and it would require maybe to make sure you go by the law. So the training costs would probably go higher. Try to find the appropriate people. That may be difficult because health and safety is more, let's say, of a targeted area in a company, especially in manufacturing. So this would not help be very open. It's not going to provide many employment opportunities, maybe a few in a specific area like health and safety, but it's not going to provide the great opportunities that we expect. New laws to prevent discrimination in the workplace. This is actually quite good, because if you try to say that you're an equal opportunity employer that, of course, is open, transparent, and respects minorities and everything. So these laws that prevent discrimination would open up the possibility for people to apply, thus creating many more employment opportunities. So this one here is quite good. If you're open to hire anyone and you're not discriminating, that would probably help people apply more and will provide more opportunity for companies to recruit more people. And finally, new laws making it more difficult to dismiss employees unfairly. That would probably be something that would keep the same people in the company, from my experience, because this new law that would make it difficult to actually dismiss someone would probably make, again, the company cautious, because the law would protect the individual, the employee, being dismissed unfairly. So the company would have to make sure that they don't do anything that would create some sort of problem for the company with maybe a cost or a legal, let's say, issue that they may get into. So they would probably not be required to get more people, because they're going to keep the people, because they cannot dismiss them, of course, unfairly. So those are my thoughts, and that's why the best option would be new laws to prevent discrimination in the workplace. Question number 37. What is the responsibility of a public oversight board? This started in the U.S. after the Enron scandal, if many of you may remember, and the Americans were keen to develop a public oversight board that would make sure that they try to check the work done by, let's say, the audit firms. That was the main reason, because of the scandals at the time. So the POB, as it's called, is there to do what? Let's see. First of all, the reestablishment of detailed rules on internal audit procedures. No, that is not the reason we have the Public Oversight Board. They don't make any rules. They check if you follow the rules, which are not made by POB. So that's not the answer. The commissioning of financial reporting standards, no, that is not something they do. That is a job of the International Accounting Standards Board or someone else, but it's not the Public Oversight Board. The Public Oversight Board checks if the audit firms or those people who are involved in auditing have done a good job and they have done it in the best manner. The monitoring and enforcement of legal and compliance standards, that sounds very, very good. So they are an oversight board. So the word monitoring is very close to that. And they make sure that they enforce the standards that are required. So yes, this is a very good option. So I like this one. I'm going to tick it from now. And finally, the creation of legislation. They're not a lawmaker. They don't make any laws relating to accounting standards. They actually do the oversight. They monitor. So that's the answer. That the answer would be option number 3. Question number 38. Adrian is the manager of a call center. Consultants have advised him that by reorganizing his teams to complete specialized tasks, the call center will be able to increase the throughput of work significantly, as well as increase the number of sales calls made to the public. The reorganization proposals are unpopular with many workers who feel that their jobs will become tedious and repetitive. The proposal to reorganize the work of the call center utilizes principles put forward by which school of management thought? Now, this is a theoretical question, and the answer to get to the theory is the scientific school, this one here. And that was the first one in the early 1900s, and maybe a bit earlier than that if you see the theory behind it, where it was first discussed on how to create some sort of efficiencies in the workplace. It was defined mainly as the systematic study of work methods, and that's what people tried to do during that era. Now, the reason why the other theories are not correct is because the administrative model has to do more with management. It wasn't as scientific, and it happened, of course, later in the 1940s, while the empirical school was mainly based on research. So this is a theoretical one, and I'm quite, I really understand when students, have to study the theory. But if you look historically, the scientific school was made by Taylor, and that's good to look into a little bit more if you want. And Fayol was more closer to the administrative school. So that is the answer, scientific school. Question number 39. The aggregate level of demand in the economy is made up of government expenditure, that's one. There are a couple that are missing, and net gains from international trade, which is, of course, exports minus imports. So we have 2 of them out of 4 that make up the aggregate level of demand. And if you've done your studies, you would know that the expenses made, the consumption by people and the investments would be the 2 that are missing, because taxes being paid does not help the aggregate level of demand formula or the savings that people made. It's the expenses that they do, not how much they save. So the answer here is 3 and 4. The investments, consumption, government expenditure, and the net gains from international trade would make up the aggregate level of demand. Therefore, the answer being the second one. Question 40. In the context of marketing, the 4 P's are price, promotion, and there's two that are missing. Now, let me just clarify something. In marketing, in the marketing elements or the marketing mix, we either have 4 Ps or we have 7 Ps. Okay, so there could be 4 or 7. Why do we have 4 or 7? The first 4 Ps, the classic Ps, were those that were more applicable to products, while the 7 Ps were those that were applicable to services. And they had 3 extra ones, which had to do with, apart from the first 4, which I will explain now, product, price, place, and promotion, which of course I know by heart, but I'll explain them. You have the 3 extra ones which have to do with processes, people, and physical evidence. So in the 4 classic Ps, it was price, promotion, and then we had product and place, these 2 here. So we're looking for 2 words. Those are the 2 words. Positioning, by the way, is a marketing term, but not a marketing element in the Ps in the Ps framework. So the first 4, just to clarify, product, price, place, and promotion, and these are the ones that we're looking for. And if we had 7, just for purposes that relate to your studies, you would have to add people, physical evidence, and processes. Question 41. Which of the following is a potential advantage of decentralization? Now let's remind ourselves what decentralization is. When you decentralize, you give others, of course, you empower others to make decisions, for example, if you're a large company, because you're not making all the decisions in a central way or a centralized way. That's one example to get the idea. So let's see which one is a potential advantage of decentralization. 1, risk reduction in relation to operational decision making. So you're making decisions at operational level and you're reducing the risk. Is that the case here? Not necessarily, because you're probably maybe making the risk higher when you decentralize the decision making on an operational level. So this is not the answer that we're looking for. Consistency of decision making across the organization. I just said that the fact that you're decentralizing is allowing others to make decisions on their own, which is empowering others. Therefore, this is not the answer because you're not consistent. You won't be consistent with what headquarters are telling you. For example, decision-making could be done at local level. So there may not be consistency. You have consistency when you're centralized, not decentralized. And finally, more accountability at lower levels. What is the word accountability? It's taking the blame or credit for what you do. And when you empower others, this seems logical to assume that it's the correct answer because you're allowing others to make decisions, therefore making them accountable for what they decide. So there is more accountability at the lower levels. Question number 42. FKT company is considering the introduction of a code of ethics following media criticism of its selling practices. Now, code of ethics is very important for every organization, and this company here, FKT, has actually had some criticism online because it wasn't selling in an ethical way, as it seems. Now, which of the following is most important when deciding on the content of the proposed code of ethics? The content. And for those who haven't studied this area, the content of the code of ethics has to do with the way the company wants their people to behave, the manners, the values that they want to portray when they do their work. So let's see which one is most important when dealing with it. First, the main issues of concern to customers who have made complaints. This is not very important when deciding the content of your code of ethics because it only looks at the concern to customers that have made the complaints. We don't want to talk about them only. That's one area. of concern. It happened recently, but it's not going to, our code of ethics is not going to cover only the complaints of the people from the selling practices that were recent. Number two, the generally accepted standards by other companies operating in the same sector. Why should we look at what other companies do? That's important if you want to benchmark maybe, but it's not the way to start and decide on the content of your proposed code of ethics. You're not going to look at what others are doing, what you should do, and how you are going to write down the code of ethics that will help your people behave better. That's not a good answer. The third answer, the minimum acceptable standards of behavior, I like the word behavior, and conduct of employees. This is very important. So the company, yes, I think this is the answer. Which of the following is most important when deciding on the content? The most important is to have the minimum acceptable standards of behavior. What do you want your people to do? What's the minimum that your people should do? How should they conduct their business? How should they behave with their clients? How should they behave with their colleagues and fellow employees? So that's a good answer here. And fourth, the legal requirements affecting the sales of core products and services. The legal requirements here, that's a compliance issue. That's not a code issue. A code of ethics has a mindset, or is there to create a mindset for people. The legal requirements, of course, that could be only a code of conduct, or it could be a compliance issue. So the first, I think the most important one here is the third one, the minimum acceptable standards of behavior and conduct of employees that we want at FKT company. Question number 43. Ahmed is preparing his personal development plan. He is particularly concerned about how others see him. In order to analyze this aspect of his personal development plan further, Ahmed should consider which two of the following. Now, when you want to think about your individual personal development plan, some companies call it IDP, the individual development plans. It's important to look at your strengths and weaknesses, right? You have to understand yourself first, right? You should consider this as an important part of doing an analysis. If you want to see how others see you, you first have to start with what you're good at and what are your weaknesses, not what you can do. That's for later on. Based on your strengths and weaknesses, you'll start to think about how you can develop further in terms of what to do. But if you want to see how others see you, the first part of your analysis would have to be understanding what are you good at and what are your weaknesses. Question number 44. Jackie leads an established team of 6 workers. In the last month, 2 have left to pursue alternative jobs and 1 has commenced maternity leave. 3 new staff members have joined Jackie's team. Which of Tuckman's group stages will now occur? So Tuckman has his following 5 stages, and here are 4 of them. We don't have all 5, but it doesn't matter. So the first stage is actually forming. Let me do this as an example of the theory. The second stage is storming. The third stage is norming. Okay. And the fourth stage is performing among these 4 that we have here. The fifth one would be adjourning, okay? So basically, Jackie had 6 workers, 3 left, which means that now she actually has a new group because she has to start from the beginning to start forming the group. And that is the answer. So which of Tuckman's group stages will now occur? You have to, of course, start with forming because half of the group is new. Question number 45. In the context of fraud, teaming and lading is most likely to occur in which area of the operation? Is it in quality control, in sales, in advertising and promotion, or in dispatch? Now, we have to understand what teaming and lading is. And to give you like a definition, it's a method by which a person who takes or handles payments, therefore we're getting closer to sales here, uses the money personally, for example, for some days and posts the transaction later. The handler receives the cash and uses it for personal purposes, instead of putting it for the company's deposits. So it's probably used more commonly here in the sales area. It's not as easy to do that in quality control, and maybe not as easy for people who want to commit fraud in advertising and promotion or in dispatch. So the answer is sales. That is because it's more like a bookkeeping fraud. When you receive money from customers, the point is to do what you have to do with it and not commit fraud.
Which of the following statements is true in relation to the average revenue function of a business in a perfect market? It's vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. Well, to answer this, first of all, let's just recap what we know about a perfect market. In a perfect market, an organization, a company, is a price taker. It cannot influence the price at which goods are sold. There is perfect information in the market. That means that the buyers of goods know all of the sellers, they know all of the products that are available. No one company can influence the price of a product in a perfect market. There are zero barriers to entry, and we have got identical or homogeneous products. But it's this point which really helps me answer the question. If we have quantity of goods sold and the price and the total revenue, we can see that if we sold one unit, and let's say that the price was $2, that means our total revenue would be $2. If we sold 2 units, the price wouldn't change. It remains at $2, therefore our total revenue would be $4. And so on. So what does that mean in terms of average revenue? Well, the average revenue remains constant at $2. Every good we sell is priced at $2. What would that look like on a graph? Well, quantity is on the x-axis, revenue will be on the y-axis. We've got a price of $2, and every single one we sell will have an average revenue of $2. So the graph will be horizontal.
Question number 47. Here are 4 references to the functions of management. A. There are essentially 5 functions of management that apply to any organization. B. Individual and group behavior at work is a major factor in productivity. C. Management is the development of a true science of work. And finally, the manager of a business has one basic function, and that's economic performance. So let's see what we have to do in task 1. Select the correct reference for each writer. Now, I know this is quite difficult because it may sound theoretical, but it's good to know, the main actors in terms of the gurus actually of management in the older days, which are Taylor, Mayo, Mintzberg, and Drucker, which the work of which we also study today. Now, my point here is to just give you the answer, and I know if you do the studies, you may remind yourself and you'll learn more about who said what. So Peter Drucker, our first option, actually said let me just draw here for a moment, said D, the manager of a business has one basic function. That's what Peter Drucker said. Now, Elton Mayo said B, which is individual and group behavior at work is a major factor in productivity. So I'll link this one here with Elton Mayo. Henry Mintzberg, who was a great guru in strategy and structures in organization, has no comment here. So you cannot link him anywhere with these references. And finally, F.W. Taylor, our last option here, is the person who quoted C, and C was management is the development of a true science of work. So those are the answers and the links for this part of the question. Now, let me go a bit further because there's another task in this area. So let me just get this out of the way. And so task 2, from the list below, identify 2 of Henry Fayol's functions of management. Now, to remember who Henry Fayol was or what he said, because he talked about the functions of management, let's remind ourselves of the theory for a moment, and then we'll come back, of course, to the answer. So he said that the 5 functions are planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. And I remember myself, in order to remind them, I used to say POCCC. So planning and organizing, the abbreviation P&O from planning and organizing, and then commanding, coordinating, and controlling, POCCC. So let me go back if I can see which ones from these 5 that Fayol noted in his theories are present. Planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. So if we go back here, let's see what we have. We do have planning and organizing. So these are the 2 that Fayol talked about. He never talked about monitoring, managing, or motivating.
This is question 48, worth 4 marks. We've got some background information. XYZ company installed a computer system to handle its main accounting functions, including accounts receivable, accounts payable, and payroll. Management have a number of concerns about access to the system and are considering a number of controls to overcome these concerns. So the question is around internal controls and in a computer environment. Let's look at the first task. It's worth 2 marks. Is each of the following a general control or an application control? Well, to answer this, obviously we need to know what is meant by a general control and an application control. General controls are around the overall reliability of the data generated by the IT systems. It covers data integrity, access to computer systems, whereas application controls are designed to ensure the accuracy of data input. This will include completeness as well as simple accuracy. So let's look at each of these items. Taking backup of data files each evening and holding backup copies off premises, is that general or application? Well, that feels much more like a system integrity control, so definitely a general control for the first one. I'm going to leave the second one for a moment. Limiting access to departmental laptops through making them password protected. Again, that's around the reliability of the data. It's a prevention of access by unauthorized personnel. So again, that's a general control. Similarly, locking the computer room to prevent access to non-employees, again, is a general control. What about the second one now, providing basic IT training to payroll staff to prevent errors in using the system? Well, you could argue there's some data integrity and overall reliability of the system there. But actually, this training is preventing errors when using the system. It's more closely aligned to the completeness and accuracy of data input. As you can see, we've got that question correct. Let's move on to task 2, an additional piece of scenario, and then it looks like we've got some drop-down boxes. So the company has considerable cash collections on a regular basis. The cashier receives the cash, records it, and then banks it at the end of the day. Since a single person is responsible for access to cash, the financial director is concerned that fraud and error may occur in cash handling and recording. He proposes the use of appropriate internal controls to prevent any such errors or misappropriations. As I read that paragraph, it talks about a single person being responsible for this cash handling system. In my mind, immediately is the idea of segregation of duties. Now that might or might not come up in the questions and the answers, but it's just going through my mind. The following sentences describe internal controls which could be used to prevent fraud and errors. Select the correct internal control to complete each sentence. Fraud and errors in handling cash can be prevented through, and now we've got the drop-down box, through internal audit, authorization limits, induction and training, and segregation of duties. Now, any of those may be correct, but we don't know which one until we complete the entire sentence. Look at the remainder of the sentence. Since no one individual can record and process a complete transaction, well, that must be segregation of duties. Fraud and errors in handling cash can be prevented through segregation of duties since no one individual can record and process a complete transaction. We then got a Lincoln sentence. Even if such a measure were introduced, the possibility exists that staff could act together to perpetrate fraud and bypass this control. Well, that just gives me even more confidence that segregation of duties is correct, as it leads on so nicely. Final sentence. This can be prevented through segregation of duties. Well, it's unlikely to be that again. Induction and training, possibly. Authorization limits, possibly. Internal audit, possibly not. I'm not sure internal audit would be able to prevent some of this happening. Maybe. Less likely. So let's finish the sentence, as it would ensure awareness of the heavy sanctions to be imposed in cases of dishonesty. Well, looking at the sentence in its entirety, the only sensible option there, which would give awareness of heavy sanctions, would be some level of induction and training. And as you can see, we've got that one correct as well.
Question number 49. Let's read the background. There are a number of ways of developing staff on a one-to-one basis within organizations. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses and is appropriate in different work situations. Common sense, I think we have different ways, we all know that, how to deal with people in the workplace. Examples of types of development include coaching, I'm sure you heard that, mentoring, counseling, and appraising people. For each work situation, which type of development is most appropriate? So let's check these out and see which one applies. An interview to help another person to identify and work through a problem. That sounds more like counseling. Why am I saying that? You're not appraising someone. If you appraise someone, you're actually evaluating someone. So you're helping someone identify a problem and work through it. That's not appraising someone. You're not mentoring someone, which means you're developing someone. That would be longer term. So you're doing something like an interview to help someone work through a problem. So the closest that you probably would be among the other three would be like coaching, but coaching also has performance, what to and guidance on what to do after that. So here it's the most appropriate one is counseling, even though there are some elements of coaching, but it's closer to counseling because coaching has guidance. You ask questions. You also try the person you're speaking to come up with answers. So counseling is closer to that. The second one, an interview, the aim of which is to review performance and identify training and development needs. When you actually interview someone to review performance, you are appraising them. So you are evaluating them. The word performance should have made you go to appraising. An approach, the third one, whereby a trainee is put under the guidance of an experienced employee who shows the trainee how to perform tasks. That's closer to coaching. You're not appraising anyone. You're not evaluating anyone. You're not counseling anyone. You're guiding someone to show how to perform a task. And that's not mentoring because it's not longer term. It's not something to develop career, let's say. And finally, a long-term relationship in which a more experienced person encourages an individual's personal and career development is mentoring, and that would be the answer. And I think now you know why. That's more long-term. It's more career development. It's not, appraising someone, not evaluating or kind of coaching someone to do something. So overall, these are the answers: counseling, appraising, coaching, and mentoring. Now let me move forward. Task 2, an organization uses mentoring as a form of one-to-one personal development. Which two of the following are benefits of this approach? So what are the benefits of this approach of mentoring? And if you remember from the definitions and from the discussion from the previous task 1, we talked about mentoring being long-term, being something that develops people, that being something that is done by a mentor that inspires rather than coaches someone on a day-to-day basis. So you don't do mentoring to decide promotions. That's wrong. You don't do mentoring to decide on the money someone gets. No one said that. You don't do mentoring to resolve a grievance if someone has a grievance. No. Do you do it for career and personal development? The answer is yes. Here's one of them. Do you demonstrate how to perform? No, that's something a coach does. Using experienced staff for training, you're not going to train. Mentoring is not training, so that's off. And finally, providing a role model for an employee. Yes, that's the inspirational part of this, and that's why mentoring has these two elements that help the approach of the mentor. Question 50. Let's read the background information. Sports for Kids is a charitable organization that operates a sports center in a large city. The land on which the playing fields and facilities are located is held on behalf of the charity by Donna and Dietmar. So the land is owned by them. The two trustees, so they're trustees. Donna and Dietmar simply hold the land on behalf of Sports for Kids and play no role in running the charity. So they're not involved in the day-to-day. They are rarely contacted by the management of the charity. However, they are the only people who are able to enter into contracts in relation to the land and its use. Sports for Kids is managed and operated by a management committee. Here's another stakeholder. The committee has decided on a major expansion of facilities by building a new sports hall. The committee has the power to legally bind the charity in all matters other than the land, which we saw that it was Donna and Dietmar's responsibility. Their decisions are overseen by the government charity regulator. Here's another stakeholder, which generally sanctions the charity's decisions except in relation to financial reporting. The management committee is negotiating with 4 building companies. The proposed expansion of the facilities has angered the local residents, many of whom are concerned about heavy building site traffic and the danger posed to the children. Many believe that the design of the new sports hall is ugly and insensitive. 3 well-respected local politicians serve on the residents' committee. So let's go to the next page. Task 1. For each of the following, indicate whether they are internal, connected, or external stakeholders. So this is a stakeholder question. Now, the local residents of that area, which of course they use, they use to play, their kids actually, are they internal? They don't work for the company. They're not internal. Are they connected? Do they have any contract, any relationship in that sense? No. Are they external? Yes. So the local residents are external. What about the members of the management committee? They run it. So I would say they're internal. They have to make decisions on behalf of sports for kids. They're not connected. Connected would be having a contract like a customer or supplier. And they're not external. They're not outside the company. They're closer inside the company. What about the 4 building companies? This is a bit tricky. They're not internal. They don't, they don't work for the company on a daily basis, or they don't have any role in the management of the company. They are considered connected because they're entering into negotiations for contract. So this was a bit tricky because someone could consider them also external, but because that they're negotiating and they're entering in agreements or pre-agreements, they're considered connected. And finally, Donna and Dietmar are also connected because even though they don't run the sports for kids, they have the land and they work with sports for kids, so they have some sort of agreement with them, and that would be connected. So local residents external, members of management committee internal, and the 4 building companies and Donna and Dietmar would be connected. Finally, now, task number 2. So here we have 2 stakeholders, and our job is to map them in reference to Mendelow's grid. Now, I'm sure all of you remember Mendelow, which actually has a grid that helps you analyze stakeholders. So we want to talk about the building companies and the local residents. So what type of stakeholder category would you put them in? And what about their communication? Now, if you know the stakeholder map by Mendelow, you would know that it looks like this. And this map talks about influence and power on this axis and interest of stakeholders on this axis, from low to high, from left to right and from bottom up, low to high. So the building companies, of course, have a lot of interest to do work because they want to get the contract, right? So basically they have low power because they cannot affect the decision, but they have high interest. So I would put them here, low power, high interest, and therefore their communication strategy would have to be keep informed, show consideration, keep them in the loop, inform them. Those would be, of course, that would be the answer for the builders, okay? If you go back now, what about the local residents? The local residents, they have a lot of power if they get together and actually negotiate and talk as a group. So their power is very high because they live in the area and they're part of the whole, let's say, setting, and their interest to get something good for their children, to be able to utilize it and use it and enjoy it, is also high. So I would say that they're high power and high interest. And what do you do in that situation? You would actually have to engage closely. They are a key player. So building companies, low power, high interest, communication strategy would be keep informed. Local residents, key player, and you, because they are high interest and high influence. So you would have to always keep them under consideration, inform them, and consider them as a key player for what you want to do. Question number 51. Accounting bodies like accaA set out codes of ethics to establish ethical behavior requirements for professional accountants. So here's our first task. Click on 4 words which are fundamental principles of ethical behavior from the IFAC, ESBA, of course, and accaA codes of ethics. And I'm sure you're familiar with the accaA code of ethics, but let's see which ones are present, of course, in both associations. And if you have done your homework, you would know that there's 5 main principles. For example, for accaA, it would be integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. So if we have these in mind, let's see what we have here so we can actually, make our answer. So integrity, yes, of course we had that. Honesty, no, it's not in. Trustworthiness is not in. Expertise is not in. Objectivity is in. Respectfulness is not. Confidentiality is in. And of course, professional behavior. So we have 4 out of the ones that we just looked at. So let's move to task 2 of question 51. Select 4 factors in the list below which distinguish a profession from an occupation. So I know your first question would be, what is a profession? Well, a profession is a group of individuals that are disciplined because they follow a code of ethics, and the group positions itself as possessing special knowledge, like accountants do. You have to have special knowledge. You have to be certified by a professional body. There's education requirements. There's updating and upskilling required. And of course, you are recognized by the public as being an expert in that field. I think that's a good way to kind of define the word profession. Now, from these elements here, characteristics, which ones are close and which ones are the one that, which elements distinguish it as a profession from an occupation. So we have highly skilled, governance by association, process of certification, training requirement, qualification by examination, acting in the public interest, ethical codes of conduct, highly valued services. So from the things I said earlier, I did mention ethics. So you do have a code of conduct, of course, for your company and for your association. You are certified, for example, to become a professional through the accaA. You have to go through a process of certification. You have to act in the public interest. And of course, in usually accountants that work for big companies and they sign financial statements, then of course they're usually bound by governance structures which make them accountable. So these are the 4 areas that kind of distinguish it. I'm not saying that the other skills are not required, but these would also go for occupation, but these 4 would only be for a profession. Question number 52. This is the last question from this exam. Company A is an accountancy professional body which has a tall structure and a high level of centralization. The span of control is very narrow. Subordinates have minimal latitude for self-determination or to influence decision-making and mainly concentrate on carrying out highly prescribed and defined roles. So this company, in terms of culture, because the question, let me go further down for a moment just to get you into the mindset of this question. For each of the 4 companies above, and we started reading company A, select the cultural dimension concerned and the level at which the company is demonstrating this cultural dimension. So this company here, the first one, if you noticed, is actually a tall, and there's like a tall pyramid. It would look like this. So you have a leader on the top and everything, and there's a lot of hierarchy here. Audit firms have this. So you have, let's say, directors and senior managers and associates and consultants, whatever. So you have a high level, and the power is very far away from the, you can't really see the leader in many cases, or it's not really open. So that kind of reminds me of company A. So that culture, if you remember your cultural dimension, which I will show you in a moment, is more like, let's say, a power culture, I would say. But let's see the rest, and we'll talk about this more in a moment. So company B is a financial services company, which gives a wide-ranging role to its traders and promotes cultural values such as assertiveness, risk appetite, and encourages a high degree of competition between employees. The employees are usually young and unmarried and work and socialize together for long hours at a frantic pace. This reminds me of a stock brokerage firm or a hedge fund where you have a lot of traders and people involved in finance, for example. Company C is a research and development company where the business is divisionalized by product. Staff work very flexibly and often need to communicate laterally to achieve objectives through ad hoc projects. Depending, ad hoc means when you need them, and collaboration. There are no formal rules about reporting structures or about set starting or finish time. So no rules, no procedures, no deadlines. Staff are rewarded on the basis of creativity and innovation. And that looks more of a company that is okay with uncertainty. Company D is a family-owned company which is highly controlled by the owners, and the CEO is the main shareholder. There is very low staff turnover, but employees are expected to be very loyal to the company and are often required to work long hours and carry out tasks outside their normal range of duties. Relationships between employees and managers are very informal and close, and the rights of employees and their overall interests are strongly defended by the owners when challenged. So company D looks like they're more, I would say, individual according to the cultural, let's say, elements. And I wanted to kind of, remind you what that means. Individualism means, strength of the ties that people have to others within the community. So it looks more like an individual company. Now, I want to show you a little bit of the theory. So we have, this is from Hofstede, by the way. So we have power distance, that would be company A. Individualism, that would be closer to company D, versus collectivism. That means when people look mostly to themselves and they're not collaborating too much. They're more individualistic. Collectivist would be the opposite, by the way. Masculinity versus femininity, and that would be company B. That would be probably the company like the stock brokerage firm that's buying and selling stock. Uncertainty avoidance, that would be company C, a bit more flexible. They don't have any deadlines. They're okay with uncertainty. And long versus short-term orientation, we don't have an example here. Or indulgence versus restraint, which has to do with people being open and when enjoying themselves, or do they restrain their joy usually? That's another cultural characteristic. Now, to give you a little bit of theory here, because I know you may need some help, this is from Hofstede. Hofstede was a researcher who did research with IBM a long time ago, decades ago, but it's one of the classic theories in cultural elements and how let's say different cultures react differently within a similar company, let's say brand. IBM is a global company, so he went to IBMs around the world, and he saw that in some countries, people were more individualistic. In some countries, power distance was more evident. In some countries, masculinity was more evident. So that's why it's a great, let's say, research, which helps us a lot in understanding these things. Now, if you go back and to give you an answer and to try to mark the answer here, as a last point. So company A, would probably be the power, let's say, structure. Company B would probably be more masculine. Company C would probably be more as we said, uncertainty oriented. They're fine with uncertainty. And company D would be more individualistic. So that's what I would say. Now, depending on the level of that, if it's high or low, I think the first one is more, I would say, high, because it does give a lot of indication that they do, value power. There is a distance there. So that would be to the higher extent, along with, the company B as well. I would say it is masculine. They go out, they hang out together, they socialize, they work long hours, very risk oriented. That's high level of masculinity. And in the other two examples, company C, the research company, as I said, the uncertainty, that would be kind of low. That would be the low level in that sense, because it's not clear as much. It's not to the higher extent of being, let's say, being open to uncertainty or liking it. And finally, in terms of the individualistic way of a culture, I would also say low in company D. So, and that's because, we do have information, but we're not, it's not clear that everyone is kind of looking for themselves, and they're not as collectivist as they probably could be. But these are, of course, I know, difficult questions in the sense because there's a lot of theory involved. And the more you know the cultural elements with examples or the cultural dimensions by Hofstede, the easier it would be for you to answer.